There is an interesting development coming out of Dnipropetrovsk. This time, Russia is not targeting tanks, not infantry positions, and not a frontline command post. The target is something far more ordinary: locomotives. According to Russia's defense ministry, 2 Ukrainian locomotives near Mykolaivka were struck by Geran drones. They were reportedly being used to transport military supplies for Ukrainian forces. And at first glance, an attack on locomotives might not sound particularly significant. But militarily, it can be. Because an army does not only need weapons, it needs the system that delivers those weapons. Ammunition has to move. Fuel has to move. Vehicles have to be transported. Personnel and equipment have to be delivered. And in Ukraine, railways play a major role in that transportation network. So, when a locomotive is destroyed, the problem is not simply the loss of one machine. The bigger issue is that part of the logistical chain is disrupted. And this is what makes the Geran strike interesting. Russia does not necessarily need to target the biggest object. It can target something with high operational value. Now let's look at this from a simpler perspective. A train can carry a huge amount of equipment, but all those carriages need one thing: power, a locomotive. Without it, those carriages are not going very far. That means destroying a locomotive can have a different effect from simply hitting one railway carriage. And this is where Russia's approach becomes interesting. It does not need to destroy the entire railway network. It does not need to level every station. It can focus on key assets that keep the system moving. Because the more locomotives that are damaged, the greater the pressure on the remaining fleet. Schedules have to be adjusted. Routes may have to change. Replacement locomotives have to be brought in. And all of that takes time. In war, time is a resource. So one strike against a locomotive should not necessarily be viewed as Russia destroyed one vehicle. There is a broader way to look at it. Russia may be trying to increase the cost of Ukrainian logistics. And if attacks like this are repeated, the pressure can accumulate. One locomotive can be replaced. 2 can be replaced. But if transport assets are repeatedly targeted, depots, stations, distribution routes, and trains carrying military equipment, then Ukraine is forced to spend more resources simply to keep its logistical system functioning. That is what gives these attacks their strategic value, not because the explosion looks spectacular, but because of where the target sits within the system. And now we reach the more interesting question. What exactly is Russia trying to achieve? If we look at this strike in isolation, the answer is simple. 2 locomotives were hit. That's it. But if we look at it as part of a broader pattern, the picture becomes more interesting. Other reports have also pointed to increased Russian attacks against Ukrainian railway infrastructure and transport assets. That tells us something. Logistics are increasingly becoming a battlefield of their own. And that makes sense, because a front line can only keep fighting as long as supplies continue to arrive. Tanks need fuel, artillery needs ammunition, drones need components, soldiers need equipment, and all of it has to be transported. So there are 2 ways to weaken an opponent's fighting capability. First, hit the units directly. Second, disrupt the system that keeps those units capable of fighting. And Russia appears to be putting increasing pressure on the second option. Geran drones provide the ability to strike targets far behind the line of contact, not just large facilities, but specific assets like locomotives. And this is where the strategy becomes interesting. A locomotive may not look like the most impressive military target, but it can be extremely useful for disrupting the movement of supplies. Of course, we should not claim that 2 locomotives will cripple Ukraine's railway system. That would be an exaggeration. Ukraine has an extensive railway network. There are reserve assets, alternative routes, and damaged equipment can be repaired. But war is not always about one strike. It is also about cumulative pressure. If logistical assets are hit again and again, the cost of keeping the system running continues to rise. And eventually, the question is no longer, can Ukraine still move supplies? It becomes, how quickly, how safely, and at what cost? That is the essence of logistics warfare, and Russia appears to be recognizing that in order to put pressure on Ukrainian combat power, it does not always have to chase the weapons at the front. Sometimes, the more important target is what allows those weapons to get there in the first place. So, two locomotives may look like relatively small targets, but in modern warfare, a small target does not necessarily mean a small impact. If those locomotives were indeed carrying military supplies, as Russia claims, then the significance of the strike goes beyond simply destroying two machines. Because what is being targeted is not just the locomotives, it is the logistical chain behind the front line. But we should still separate what is known from what remains a claim. The assertion that the locomotives were carrying military supplies comes from the Russian side and has not been fully independently verified. So, what do you think? Is this simply a temporary disruption? Or is it part of a broader Russian strategy to make Ukrainian logistics increasingly expensive and increasingly difficult to maintain? Let me know what you think in the comments. Let's think about it together. And if you enjoy this kind of military analysis, support the channel with a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because we are not just looking at what happens on the front line, we are also looking at the system behind it that keeps the war moving. Disclaimer: this video is produced for information and analysis purposes. Some information regarding targets, the function of specific assets, and their cargo comes from parties involved in the conflict and cannot always be independently verified. Information may change as new evidence or reports emerge. This video does not endorse violence against civilians or promote armed conflict.